And good morning. I'm so glad to see each one of you this morning, and especially for those who are visiting. And I know we have a couple of visitors amongst us this morning, and we're so glad that you have come. And we'd ask you if you just briefly stay a moment afterwards so we can at least introduce ourselves to you and get to know you just a little bit better. A couple of side items before we begin. I've had many observations of my beard and different criticisms of for or against. It only is going to stay one more week. So as the team will play their championship game on Saturday. So grateful for that. And I know some of you are happy for that. So that will be good to end that myth that it's going to stay. Also, someone asked about the roping in the back. We are having this side of our building re-roofed. We have patched as often as we could, and still in Weldon's classroom, we were still having rain pour in as water will find its way on flat roofs any way it can find its way in. So be patient with that. They started on last Monday, and hopefully they should be finishing up. And then November is not typically one that you think of fifth Sundays, but we had 5 Sundays this month. And so Garrett Bookout, the new minister at Northwest, will be here this evening. So I want you to be able to come back and greet him. This will be his first experience at Fifth Sunday Preachers Exchange. So you make sure that he feels welcome to the Lawton surrounding community and here at University. I will be going to the east side over at Sullivan Village. Most people seem to think that adversity is always bad. It comes from something evil. And for the most part, none of us love problems in life, sudden changes, maybe a dramatic curve, something that we would call adversity. But I want us to consider something this morning. Have you ever stopped and thought or even believed that adversity, with all of its bad and all of what we think of, may have some advantages? It's not usually an angle we look for. It's not usually something that we look kindly upon. I know that it may seem like a new concept to change our thinking of that, but to actually stop and see how God can use this. As the verse would say, God used it for good. How can it when it feels so bad? How can it when it disturbs me so much? We mentioned in class, and I was remembering Paul requesting to the Lord as we talked about petitioning our prayers upon God upon anything. He wants to hear from us. He wants a relationship, an intimate relationship with us. If we're hurting, if we're sorrowful, if we're happy, if we're joyous, he wants to hear us on both accounts. But even Paul had to wrestle with a thorn in the flesh and ask that be removed from him. And I know that that's not a good reply when God says, well, my grace is sufficient for you. Something that Paul says that later on I had to learn to be content in whatever condition, whatever situation that I'm in. Because as we go about life, and with its problems, with adversity, with struggles, problems can actually make us better if we refuse, and that's the key word, refuse to make us bitter. I even have to remind myself in situations that I say, with this, one of two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to become better for it and move on and grow from it and learn from it, or I'm going to become bitter. And we see people in both our lives that can sit and stew, and in a stew of bitterness is never anything good. I know we like stews and chilies this time of the year when it's cold, but simmering in your own crock pot of all of the adversity of life is never going to be something that's going to become better for us. But for inspiration in the Bible, we often tend to look at Joseph, as I have over these past several months, as he set really ultimate examples in various situations, and to find out how he responded and what he did about it. We see, above else, his character. We see his character shine over and over, situation after situation. Maybe it's good for all of us to go back and review Joseph's life basically from start to finish, because when you look at his life of just unfairness, just on that alone, outside of Christ, I don't know of anyone else in the Bible that experienced such unfairness of life through mainly a good portion of his life than Joseph did. We also have Job as an example in the Bible. But Joseph stands out to me as one who was so mistreated in all variations and stages of his life. Not just all at one time, as Job had kind of the massive production before him at once, and then it left at once. This was kind of more spread out. If you know his story, first by the jealousy of his brothers to throw him in the pit. You think about that. Most of us have good family relations. But if you think about the strife that went on in his family, and you go deeper and involved of the jealousies and the strifes that continued with his family, for them to say that we hate him so much, we want him to die. Brother Reuben, the oldest, had to say, I can't have that on my head as well. I've already disappointed Dad by being with one of his handmaids. I'm not going to have a death sentence on top of that on me, because I know what that will result in. So even though throwing a young man in a pit and then selling him to slavery could also lead to ultimate death, you didn't know what the slave traders were going to do with him. It almost is, in essence, a death sentence. But to have your family abandon you, to throw you in a pit, when all seemed to be going well, you're kind of Dad's favorite, so to speak, and wore the coat of many colors. Then to be sent into slavery, which could have resulted in his death. They didn't know. He didn't know what would ultimately happen. To then later being sent to prison, again unjustly, for a crime he did not commit. Saying no to Potiphar's wife. And for most of us would say, well, you know, he was following God's path. He was trying to live a righteous life, and you're right. And what reward does he get? To be thrown in prison? How oftentimes in that time of solitude to be able to say, why me? Why now? Why this situation? And yet when you go back and recount that story, it says, and God was with him. From the pit, God was with him. In prison, God was with him. God continued to be with him, even in those circumstances. Even having to extenuating services to be able to stay in there longer. We don't know how long, just 2 years extended from wherever time that he was in to begin with. To more unfairness. To only further sit in prison longer. And then finally, get to be in the palace above all things. To leave the prison cell to be second in command in one day. So from pit to prison to the palace, you see God in Joseph's life, every situation. God was with him throughout that. And that should help us when we tend to struggle and reaffirm that when we read the passage that God promises that he would never leave us nor forsake us. Not come in and rescue us and make sure that everything goes right, as a lot of messages tend to do. But he's not going to leave us. He's going to be there with us. I love many of the images, and some of you may have saved that yourself, about the footprints in the sand. It's so famous. You see the 2 footprints, and then it goes down to 1, and the little narration says, you know, I saw you, God, walking with me along the way, and then all of a sudden I say, a lone set of tracks, why did you leave me? So that's not when I left you, that's when I carried you. Those were my footprints. The awakening that God is not going to leave us. It's interesting to also point out that the psalmist looks back as the story is told and recounted again as Joseph's example when he writes this in Psalms 105 and 17. He sent a man before them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. They afflicted his feet with fetters. He himself was laid in irons. That last part, that last phrase, laid in irons, translate literally, his soul came into irons. That's just not being in prison now. See, there was something that happened in that prison situation. Of course, it in God's providence knew what was going to happen, because this man was going to be able to lead a nation out of poverty, out of the desperate situation, out of starvation. Not just being in irons physically, but his soul. That means he was so deeply affected by this situation. To all of his being, all of his emotions, his soul. His soul came into iron. That's a very interesting part of the text. Was affected by it. God toughened him up, so to speak. For what? so he could turn around and be that leader, that man who saves thousands. He went through all that to get him to be a great leader during a huge famine, to have an iron soul. How do we get there, and what does God have in store for us, perhaps, when we continue to serve him? If we think the lifestyle Joseph lived before being thrown into the pit, as he walked around his daddy's favorite, as I mentioned, in the coat of many colors, do you think that that situation would have prepared him for what he would ultimately have to do? I think that most of us would agree that no, I don't think that that would be in the right situations and the conditions based on what he had to go through. See, that's where we see God come in. But that's always, in that we say as hindsight's 20/20, that's always in past tense. Like many things in your life that we struggle and go through, you look back and you reflect. And sometimes you say, you know what, I'm so glad that God did this for me. I didn't understand it during that situation. I didn't have all the answers. And Tim had mentioned that, that little thing about not getting all those things that he prayed for. We mentioned that in class. And I remember that a song that Garth Brooks had is, I thank God for unanswered prayers. Because, you hope and you want everything to be this way. And that may have not been the best way. But when looking back, God saw to it as iron sharpens iron. He makes us strong, possibly even through suffering. Because for many to say that we get strength through difficulties, goes back in the sand, the footprints in the sand about we always think it's our strength. And it's, Philippians 4:13 says that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But for us to see that difficulties in life actually makes us stronger, flies in the face of the modern wisdom and actually some preaching today. Today, as some preach only the great wealth and health gospel, it teaches the idea that all that God wants for you and for me is for things to be right in your life and to always work out. And you have to believe that with all confidence. Now, what about all these stories that I read from Genesis to Revelation that it wasn't that way? And then all of a sudden I want to pass, that all of a sudden I get everything to work out for me, become easy. There is no wonder so many blame God, and you see it every single time, for misfortune when it comes upon them. What do they say? Why did God allow this to happen to me? Why did God make me go through this? Why, God? Instead of really having the confidence of knowing that he is with us, we're supposed to be sheltered from all of that. And this message comes across so subtle and even sounds spiritual at times. That we're not supposed to be ill. That we cannot be sick if we have not failed to trust in God. Especially for us being so faithful. He in turns then just makes everything right in our lives and makes us prosper and rich in material things and so many other blessings. But that's not the message that we find from the New Testament at all, or the Old Testament. Those who even started in the church in the first century. That you'll be persecuted for my name's sake. You will be hated. How could we be out in any battle as it speaks of? How can we be a soldier of Christ? We sing a song, Soldiers of Christ Arise. How can we be battle tested if we've not gone through anything? Joseph could not have either. If he was just taken from his home with a coat of many colors straight into leadership, how do you think that leadership would have come out? Well, we don't really know, but you can only guess that it probably would not have had the same results, because God toughened him up through this situation to prepare him for what he was ultimately going to do, to be a soldier of Christ. It would be difficult if all we got was pampering. It would be like Joseph coming from his early backgrounds into the palace. It would not possibly turned out that way, and God knew it. And you can't find that protection and guarantee in the Bible. Nowhere does it tell us from cradle to grave we'll all avoid problems in life. It tells us how we to handle problems. It tells us why they're there and why he is there. But again, we can see that there are some advantages to having just this adversity. Problems, if we choose to look at them in this way. Because problems can promote maturity, for one. See, when they come out, and when they come, and they do this. They prove your character. They prove your integrity. See, character is not just something that is just said about you. It's proven. It's gone through some tests. They've seen you and I and others in certain situations, and then your character beams through just like Joseph. How he handled those situations. It shows who you really are, and it's not altered, unlike the psychology of today, because of circumstances. Because they say, you are because. You are this because, and I guess there's just no saving you. Because Joseph, for one, showed through that all that God was with him. His character shone bright every time, and so it can be for us. We can review how to handle difficult situations. And with a lot of people that want to say and make us believe that situations make you, Joseph says, I dare to differ. Well, this circumstances has made me who I am today. And you've heard that. No, actually, the situation revealed who you were in the first place. That's called character. Who you really were. In times of problems, in times of strife, whether you run or whether you lie or whether you cheat, all in situations reveal your character. And mine too. That's why Scripture compares it to fire while purifying gold. Over in 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7, in this you greatly rejoice. Greatly rejoice about what? Even though now for a little while, even now, not all the time, but for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials. Does that sound like cradle to grave that I get a pass? No, it says that it's going to be temporary. It's just for a little while and right now and if necessary, so that the proof of your faith, that's your character, that's your integrity, being more precious than gold. Do you think that your character is more precious than gold? I tend to doubt it in the 2014 in the political realm and others when they say character doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that he or she has done this or done that. We're going to vote for him anyway. And then there's another group of people say, no, character is all that matters. Because we know in times of trial, we're going to need that character to beam through and not to cower and not to run. And that's why we look for leaders with great character, even today. But this faith, the proving of our faith, that is more precious than anything that you can imagine, we're supposed to take care of. It's more precious than gold, which is perishable, by the way, even though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. I'll be rewarded for that. That's why I'm convinced that so many of us that believe in that character and believe in that lifestyle will love his appearing. It won't be a surprise. The Lord is going to return one day, and we are anxiously awaiting. And why so many others on the other side of that will cower and run to the hills to say, hide me from a just God. And lastly, the third part of that group that will not be prepared and thought they were. Job says when God was finished testing him that he would come out as pure gold in Job 23 and 10. It reveals the impurities and then burns them up. And what's left standing is what everyone desires, just like in the gold standard. When you see it in its purity, that's why at Christmas time they jingle it around to you. It's wonderful to pass on as a gift. See, that's character. That's what you have inside you, what I have in me that's supposed to shine. And when we face difficulties of life, unbeknownst to sports figures who says, don't examine me, don't look at me, don't make me your role model. I'm sorry, you don't get a pass on that either. Other people are watching and waiting and seeing what you do in adversity, seeing what you're doing in situations. That's character. God uses us for others. Another advantage we gain is the problems also produce a sense of dependency, and that's what it's really supposed to show as well. Joseph saying that I am here because of all of what I have accomplished. And don't you know I was thrown in the pit and I was there in prison? No, it was God was with him. God was with him. God was with him. It's what those in the wilderness were supposed to see all along, for us to really say and believe that I am nothing without God. That's what they were supposed to see. Why do you think he took them out to a desert? Now they often questioned, you've taken us out here to die. There's no food, there's no water. I know exactly. Because who are you going to depend on for that? And now come the manna. every single day. Can you imagine no soup lines? That's what I was so encouraged by. You see the amount of people that had to be fed on a daily basis. God did the only way that you could do. The lines would be so long that you could, by the time you started it, lunch would be started by the time the end would get through breakfast. And manna was right outside your door, right outside your tent, for each to be able to have. Trust in God, so he provided manna. And then again later, meat with a quail. No water, no problem. God provided it by the rock, the spiritual rock, which we know in the New Testament says, which is Christ. He provided a shade by day and a pillar of fire by night. Depend on me. Depend on me. Look to me. Even look to me to fight your battles. We're so human. He says, we want to sit here and count ourselves like we do. We want to put up an attendance chart. He says, don't rely on that. I'm your strength. No, but we got to have a census. We got to know how many, because that will decide our battles. No, it's not. That's why Gideon had to learn that you're going to win this with far less than what anybody would think that you could accomplish, because you're not doing the battle. I am. I am fighting the battles for you. And then to keep them going, to take them in and make them his people. Some got the message loud and clear, and that's why we still live today with those promises, while still others became grumblers and complained and then dropped off very quickly, dying out in the wilderness. And even with Joseph in prison, the text says, but the Lord was with him. And he is with us no matter what the situation. Why so many go back and read Psalms 139 and verse 7 says, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remote part of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand will lay hold on me. If I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me, and the light around me will be night, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day. Darkness and light are alike to you. We understand that that's the most important relationship we have. And I know several of you have been married for a long time. I can only hope that I can have that with my wife, Kay, for the longevity that many of you have survived. But do we still realize the most important relationship that you have has to be with God? Because when we separate, because we always talked about this in class, even this morning, it's appointed once for man to die. When we die, we cross over alone, unless we have God with us. Our spouse can't hold our hand and say, we'll get through this. We've seen this before. We've been together for 40, 50, 60 years. I'll hold your hand through this. Can't do it. And that's why it says here, whether it's in the heavens or in Sheol, in the grave, you are there. And that's an important relationship to have. The only thing that stops God being with us is sin and our rebellion to him. He is not going to force his will upon us. When we live a life for him, he follows us everywhere. Sin, on the other hand, what does it do? It breaks up fellowship. It divides. It kills. We've seen those stories in the Bible as well. And Joseph's life, while you go back and read it, shows whether it was pit to being in prison or in the palace. In the end, God was with him. Not gone for a while to return when things get better. We need to be reminded of those facts and believe in all our heart that this is true. Evil may have temporary victories, but they're just that, as the passage that I read before. For now, they're just temporary. Sometimes troubles come in life to show us how dependent we are upon the Lord. We're supposed to be. Because we live in so much of the opposite. The humanism philosophy, it's called, the self-help. I can do it. I can build myself up to gain more self-confidence, saying, you can do it. You have what's in it to do it. Everything will be all right. Trusting within ourselves. Reach for the stars. Nowhere do we find in those philosophies, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Philippians 4:13. Sometimes, with that way of thinking, we may see that there is no need or little need of God. Why? Because I have it all. I've taken care of it all. Haven't you seen what all I've accomplished? Do we hear that in the verbiage of Joseph? I have it all under control. I got this. So what about our problems and adversity? Well, maybe the most beneficial comes from this. It's where God can use it for his glory, as we read, and for others. It may prepare my heart for ministry. See, over in Genesis 40, you'll find something unique about Joseph with one of his situations, which says this in verses 6 and 7. When Joseph came to them and observed them, behold, they were dejected. He asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, and why are your faces so sad today? Now remember, here Joseph is in prison unjustly. Now let's flip that in your and my shoes. How would we respond in that way if we were in his situation? What would our character revealed? Would it be wrapped up in self-pity? Would it be a petition of prayer saying, oh Lord, why have you put me in this situation? Why have you allowed this to happen to a great servant of yours? Don't you know what all I've done? No, instead we see the sufferer serving. Wow. What a message that sends. That's a great message. He sees their sadness and wants to comfort them and comfort them in their strife and not be comforted. Who's here to see me? And listen to my plight. He takes his eyes off of what is happening to him and he goes to serve. Now that's why the correlation so much is Jesus and Joseph parallels, and they're not trying to make Joseph Jesus by any means or part of the Godhead. But he got it. And he got it before Christ. He takes his eyes off of his situations and ministers. When we go back and through these things, it can make us sensitive to the plight of others, and especially if it's something that we can all relate to. That's what it's used for. You're going through something? I've got someone over in the congregation that can meet with you that has gone through the same situation that you are. And then we see the needs of others and those around us. Suffering makes us reach out to others, perhaps, unless we become bitter. And for others, it brings in a heart of ministry. And I've witnessed this on numerous occasions in this congregation alone. And so much recently, things have happened to some of you, and that you've reached out and you've shown your heart of ministry. That's incredible. If we hadn't walked through some of the things in life, how would you be able to put our arms around someone else with such compassion, with so much understanding, with disappointments in life, and heavy bereavements? Because we've seen it. We've touched it. We've tasted it. To be able to tell someone in our heart of hearts, I know just how you feel. You've heard me use this before, but it's the difference between sympathizing and empathy, and being emphatic, to be able to empathize with someone. There's a big difference. I can offer sympathy to you if you're going through something that I cannot relate to. But if I've gone through that, then I know. And see, that's why Jesus is our ultimate know. That we can go to him and say, do you know what it's like? Yeah. That's why he sent his son, so he could be tempted in all ways as we have, and yet without sin. And then we can truly mean it. Sometimes we have problems, so God can prepare us to get us ready to help someone else if we can get outside of ourselves. See, Joseph, through all, learned that compassion as he went through, and even in this prison situation, learned to serve. So now how eager is he to help out people with grain to a famished nation? Because I'm sure that he was in those lines filling up those baskets when they came by. And a heart of compassion and know all their situations. Think he could talk to someone that their family had abandoned him? Yeah. Think he could talk to someone that was unjustly accused of something that they didn't do? Yeah. But how God did that, to start with Joseph, was to break his heart in prison. Not something that we all want to stand up and do, is it? Yes, we may not have to go to prison like Joseph to learn, but we've all kind of had our own prisons. So then we can sit back and see God working through all of it if we are a child of his. At a particular moment, not to just get past, but to look back and see it, so we may start to see and understand different approach to our problems than ever before. That now that they may have great opportunities, instead of asking, why is this happening to me, God will use it, and for good, and for Him, if we can take and use them and not keep that for ourselves. When the next time that we ask, why does God allow this to happen? He may put us through it so we can learn to mature, to show our character, to see how dependent we are truly on Him. I cannot be where I am without His grace. To mature, to go through some fire at times so I can grow. But you may say this, Eric, I don't like them. Well, I'm going to tell you, I don't either. And I'm sure Joseph probably didn't raise his hand for any of it either. No one raises their hands for more problems and adversity so we can get all this positive thing that you're trying to throw upon us this morning. It's why we have so much anxiety today and why there's pharmacies almost on every block to stay away from anxiety. I'm too anxious. I'm worried. I'm worried about this. I'm worried about that. And I'm not saying that we don't have those. But we always go to the wrong source. And nothing against druggists and pharmacists, and I know them, and we have them in our families. But that's not the ultimate cure. The more trust in me and less trust ultimately with God. I just can't wait upon that. I don't want to go through this. Sometimes I may even try to run from them, and they ultimately catch up with me anyway. But if all I can do to wrap up is found in 1 Corinthians 4 and 1 and 2 says, let a man so consider us as servants of Christ, and servants and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that one be found faithful. That's what Joseph showed, that through it all, he is found faithful. Could he have abandoned God right after the pit? Sure he could have. Could he have abandoned God even more in prison? Even more likely. But he didn't. Above all else, and in spite of the situations, how many would like to say, well, Joseph, you're not even supposed to be acting like this. You're not even supposed to be a productive man of society because all of these things are supposed to make you a bitter person, reserved and sit in a hole. This wasn't supposed to do this, according to modern psychology. Can this character and integrity be said of you and your character when this happens? When that happens, I hope this morning it makes you look at problems just a little more differently than you did before. Not swallow them any easier, because I'm sure Joseph had times in prison of the woe's me as well, just like Paul did. Paul went through some of that. My grace is sufficient for you. Okay? Well, then Paul says, I learned to be content in whatever situation I'm in. I know I'm shipwrecked and I'm bobbing like a cork up in the water. I've been beaten. All these things. If we can be an encouragement to you, and that's what this morning offers, is an invitation that we can be here for you and with you on whatever's going on in your life. And maybe you need that extra help and support, and you need a family of praying individuals such as this congregation that are willing to do that. Maybe you've never obeyed the gospel, and we don't ever want an opportunity to go unnoticed, to say everything is ready and everything is prepared for this moment, if that is your desire. Whatever your wish is, whatever your need is, if you'll come now and make it known as we stand and as we sing.